For thousands of years, I mean, almost every major human civilization has been built on this one unquestioned, ironclad rule. You obey your parents.
Right. It's the ultimate foundational law.
Exactly. Disobeying them wasn't just like a family dispute. It was treated as a literal crime against the universe. But what if the deepest, most foundational ancient text on this exact subject actually tells you the polar opposite?
Yeah, what if it completely flips the script?
Right. What if it commands you to draw a hard line against your own family the very moment they abandon verifiable truth?
It completely shatters the entire foundation of tribalism.
Okay.
And honestly, that is exactly what we're going to look at today. We are dealing with a text that actively dismantles the ultimate human hierarchy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking you on an intense, highly sophisticated exploration of civilizational design.
Sounds intimidating, but it's really fascinating.
It totally is. Our mission today is to dissect a foundational text, Surah Luqman, specifically verses 14 through 16. But listen, if you think you're in for a sermon today, you can just throw that expectation out the window right now.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at this through the analytical, systemic lens of the thinker Ghulam Ahmad Parvez.
Which I think means we need to establish some ground rules for our approach today right off the bat.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
So this is not a session of religious sentimentality. There will be no preaching, no mystical interpretations, and no theological jargon.
None of that.
Instead, we are going to analyze these three verses the way master sociologists or like systems engineers would analyze a societal blueprint.
I love that. We are going to show you how these three specific verses construct a complete unyielding architecture of individual responsibility and socioeconomic accountability.
It's a total paradigm shift.
I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, everything you thought you knew about traditional filial piety, family loyalty, and how moral ledgers actually work is going to be completely rewired.
Let's get straight into the architecture.
Let's do it. So, verse 14, this is the biological foundation, and the text starts with this incredibly visceral, clinical description of pregnancy and nursing. It says the mother bears the child in weakness upon weakness and weans the child for 2 years.
Notice the total lack of romanticization there.
Right, it's so raw.
It really is. It doesn't talk about the mystical glow of motherhood or anything like that. It talks about the physical reality of resource depletion. Parvez frames this through a concept called Ramaniyat.
Okay, unpack Ramaniyat for us.
To understand this systemically, think of Ramaniyat as an automated universal law of unconditional nourishment.
Oh, like the fundamental physics of biological reproduction.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
I mean, during pregnancy and breastfeeding, the mother's body transfers its own essence, calcium from her bones, iron from her blood, vital nutrients straight to the child.
So she's literally dissolving.
Yes. She is enduring weakness upon weakness because her structural integrity is literally being broken down to build a new human being. But the critical distinction Parvez makes here is that this is a purely biological, automated process governed by a universal law.
She's not doing the math on the nutrient transfer.
Exactly, no. The mother isn't consciously intellectually engineering the milk or calculating it. She is serving as the biological host for a universal system of provision.
And from a sociological standpoint, that creates a really fascinating leveling effect. Because, if I'm thinking about this in terms of human equality, that biological phase is literally the only time in a human life where absolute parity exists.
That is a profound point.
Right. If you take the breast milk provided to the infant of a fabulously wealthy queen living in a giant palace, and you analyze it next to the breast milk provided to the infant of an impoverished laborer living in a slum, I mean, the universal system of nourishment does not recognize their social class.
It totally ignores it. The automated biological provision is fundamentally biochemically the same. The universal law is flawless, and it distributes resources equitably.
It's a perfect baseline.
Yeah, that infant in the slum is receiving the exact same standard of baseline biological care from the universe as the infant in the palace.
But, and this is the massive catch, that biological equality has a strict expiration date. And the text points it out explicitly. It's the end of the 2-year weaning period. Because what happens at 2 years?
The automated system just stops.
It stops. The biological umbilical cord is finally completely severed, and human agency enters the chat.
The baton is passed, and as soon as the weaning period ends, humans take over the distribution of what the text calls risk.
Risk, that's a huge concept.
It is. Now, risk is a term that gets thrown around a lot to mean like vague spiritual blessings, but systemically, It means sustenance, it means economic resources, land, water, food, capital.
The hard stuff.
The physical resources, exactly. And Parwes points out a terrifying reality here. The very moment human agency enters the distribution of resources, inequality begins.
Wow. Because the queen's child is suddenly being fed from a hoard of generational wealth protected by armies and property laws, while the laborer's child is suddenly subjected to the brutal artificial scarcity created by human economic systems.
Right, the universe didn't stop providing enough food for both of them.
Humans just decided to hoard it.
Exactly. And that human interference, that hoarding and artificial division of resources, that is how Parwes defines the concept of shirk.
Okay, hold on. I need to stop you right there.
I knew you would.
I mean, I have to, because for anyone listening who has any background in traditional theology, shirk is universally translated as idolatry, polytheism, bowing down to a carved piece of wood or a stone statue. So how do we get from a stone statue to economic hoarding?
I get it. It sounds like a massive jump. But that is the tragedy of reducing a sociological blueprint to mere theology. Think about what a statue actually represented in the ancient world.
It was a god.
It was. But it wasn't just a piece of art or a vague spiritual concept. A temple idol was the literal center of a local economy.
Oh, like a central bank.
Exactly like a central bank.
Oh.
The priests who controlled the idol controlled the wealth, they controlled the agriculture, the social hierarchy. To bow to the idol was to submit to the economic monopoly of the ruling class.
That makes so much sense.
So systemically, shirk means associating flawed, unjust human hierarchies with the flawless, equitable system of universal distribution.
Oh, that completely flips the script. So creating a society where one child starves in a neighborhood right next to a child who inherits a billion-dollar trust fund isn't just, an unfortunate economic reality.
No, not at all.
According to this text, it is a structural violation of the universe's baseline equality. It's humans trying to play God by overriding the equitable distribution we just saw during the biological phase.
It is the ultimate glitch in the code. You are replacing loyalty to the universal law of equitable provision with loyalty to your own biased man-made system. And that brings us to the core conflict of verse 14 regarding parents. The text commands profound gratitude. It explicitly tells you to be grateful to the universal system first, the ultimate source of that automated nourishment, and to the parent second.
So it acknowledges the debt.
It does. It acknowledges a massive, undeniable biological debt.
Yeah.
Your mother sacrificed her physical strength to host the universal system for you.
But tradition takes that real biological debt and completely weaponizes it. The traditional narrative says, your mother went through agony to build your body, therefore she owns your mind.
Like a total leap.
You owe your parents absolute unquestioning obedience for the rest of your life. It treats a family unit as an unquestionable dictatorship.
Which is an enormous leap of logic that the text flatly rejects. Verse 14 establishes a measurable debt of gratitude, but it absolutely does not demand a surrender of your intellect.
It's like confusing the hardware manufacturer with the software engineer. I've been thinking about this analogy. Tell me if this works. My parents built the biological hardware. They literally assembled my physical body, my bones, my nervous system, using the raw materials provided by the universe.
I follow you.
And I owe them immense, lifelong gratitude for that. I have a duty to maintain that hardware, to respect the manufacturer. But just because they built the computer, that does not give them the right to install malware in my brain and demand that I run it.
That is brilliant.
They don't get to dictate the operating system of truth, logic, and ethics that I operate on.
The software analogy perfectly captures the transition into verse 15, because verse 15 acts as the systemic firewall against that exact malware.
That firewall.
The text installs a hard, unyielding epistemic boundary. It states, accompany them in this world with kindness, but if they press you to associate with me what you have no knowledge of, do not obey them.
What you have no knowledge of. Let's translate that out of the ancient phrasing. It's demanding empirical evidence. It's saying, if your parents demand you accept a worldview that lacks proof, that isn't rooted in verifiable reality, you hit the brakes.
It draws a permanent, solid wall between how you feel about someone and what you know is empirically true. Parwes notes this is the fundamental difference between maintaining a healthy social bond and completely surrendering your epistemic framework.
You don't have to choose one or the other.
Right. You owe your parents physical support, but your ultimate loyalty is to accurate causation. It is a paradigm of loyalty to law over loyalty to kin.
To really understand how radical that is, we have to look at what this text was up against. In almost every ancient epic, the ultimate hero is the one who submits to the family hierarchy, no matter how stupid or unjust the family's demands are.
Absolutely, it's a recurring theme.
Look at the Ramayana. You have the figure of Ram, who is considered the absolute paragon of virtue. Why? Because his father, King Dasharatha, makes a foolish, impulsive promise to a younger wife, and as a result, commands his son Ram to go into exile for 14 years.
A completely irrational command.
Totally irrational. It throws the entire kingdom into chaos. But traditional religion views Ram's blind obedience to this flawed decree as divine. It's the ultimate submission to the father.
It is the glorification of unjust hierarchy for the sake of social peace. The Quranic text looks at that model and completely dismantles it. It elevates an entirely different paradigm, the model of Abraham.
Right, Abraham.
If you look at the narrative of Abraham, his defining characteristic is that he actively interrogated and rejected his father's worldview. His father was an idol maker, which, as we discussed, means he was a key player in the unjust economic monopoly of his city.
He was part of the central bank.
Exactly. Abraham didn't say, well, he's my dad, I have to support the family business. He told his father, your system lacks evidence. It is unjust. I will not follow it.
So if a parent's worldview promotes inequality or racism or just blatant scientific ignorance, the law of truth takes absolute precedence over the comfort of the family unit.
Yes.
The law wins.
But here is the trap I think a lot of people fall into when they hear this. They think this gives them a license to be cruel. Just cut their parents off, scream at them over Thanksgiving dinner, and just walk away. But the text doesn't say that, does it?
Not at all. It handles this with incredible emotional sophistication. It commands you to disobey the irrationality, but in the exact same breath, it commands you to treat them with asan.
Right, but let's break down asan, because in casual conversation, people just translate that as be nice, like just be good to your mom. But systemically, it means something much more targeted.
The Arabic root of asan does not mean a vague sense of politeness. It means to restore a lost balance. It means identifying a specific void that has been created and actively filling it to return a system to equilibrium. So if I'm looking at my aging parents, I have to ask, what is the specific void of old age? If we just look at this economically, people assume the void is money. They need food, they need a roof.
But Parwez points out that wealthy elderly people who have massive bank accounts, private chefs, and huge estates suffer terribly in old age too. They waste away. So the void isn't a lack of calories or cash.
It's something much deeper.
The void is the terrifying loss of relevance. It is the physical decline, the cognitive weakness, the realization that the world is moving on at a speed you can no longer track.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. The text views the isolation of the elderly as akin to solitary confinement. For humans, who are hypersocial creatures, solitary confinement is the most devastating psychological punishment you can inflict. The void they are experiencing is a profound social and emotional severing.
Think about how modern Western societies try to solve this. We completely outsource it. We think we are fulfilling our duty by providing a state pension, or we find a nice, clean facility, an old age home, and we just write a check every month.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. Or we leave them to sit on a lonely bench in a park, totally disconnected from the vibrant, chaotic life of the family.
And Parwez fiercely critiques that outsourcing. A pension and a clean room might fill the caloric and physical void,
Right.
but it vastly deepens the void of isolation. Outsourcing care does not fulfill the systemic requirement of asan.
So what does?
Asan requires maintaining their dignity. The term used is takrim. It requires keeping them integrated within the active, breathing family unit.
How does the text visualize this? Because I know there's a specific metaphor used here that is really striking.
It commands the child to lower the wing of humility to them out of mercy. Think of a mother hen. When her chicks are small, vulnerable, and unable to regulate their own temperature, she physically spreads her wings and shelters them against her body to protect them from the cold and from predators.
A literal biological shield.
Exactly. And a text is reversing the timeline. When you were a vulnerable child, your parents took you under their wing. Now the biological clock has turned. They are the ones who are frail. Asan means you must actively, physically, and emotionally shelter them under your wing. You protect their dignity from the harshness of their own decline.
But practically, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone listening to this right now. Maybe they have a parent who is deeply entrenched in a toxic political ideology or holds wildly prejudiced views.
It's a very common reality.
How do you navigate this tension? The text says, shelter them emotionally, lower the wing of mercy, keep them at your dinner table. But it also says, flatly refuse to obey their flawed ideologies, hold the epistemic boundary. How do I shelter someone while simultaneously rejecting their worldview?
It requires an immense degree of emotional intelligence and systemic integrity. You protect the human, but you do not protect their flawed ideas.
That's a tough line to walk.
It is. You ensure they are warm, fed, and part of the family structure. You do not aggressively belittle their cognitive decline. But when they demand you adopt their prejudice or execute an unjust command, you firmly and calmly decline. You do not let their biological vulnerability become a Trojan horse for systemic injustice.
Let's push this boundary to absolute extreme to test how strong it really is. Let's take it out of the living room and into a court of law. Let's say your parent commits a severe crime, embezzlement, fraud, something that actively harms others, and you are subpoenaed to testify.
The ultimate test of loyalty.
Right. Does lowering the wing of mercy mean you protect them from the legal consequences? Do you lie to save them?
Under Parwez's systemic reading, the answer is an absolute, unequivocal no. The system of truth completely overrides the biological bond.
No exception.
None. If justice requires testifying against your own parents, you step into that courtroom, not as a loyal son or daughter, but as a witness for the universal ledger of truth. You provide the empirical facts, even if those facts send the parent who raised you to prison.
That is heavy. The architecture here is uncompromising. You owe them the shelter of your home, but you do not owe them perjury. You owe them a place at your table, but you do not owe them your integrity.
Which is the defining characteristic of a civilization built on the rule of law, rather than the rule of tribalism. Tribalism says, my family, right or wrong. This system says, the truth, regardless of my family.
Okay, so if the family isn't the ultimate judge of my actions, and I have to reject their flawed worldviews, what stops me from just making up my own flawed worldview? If I'm supposed to be an independent agent, who or what is actually keeping score?
Now we get to the mechanics.
This brings us to verse 16, where we get into the actual mechanics of how this universe tracks human behavior. Luqman gives his son this incredibly vivid metaphor. He says, even if an act were the weight of a mustard seed hidden in a rock in the heavens or in the earth, the system will bring it forth.
The system will bring it forth. This is where Parwez does some of his most vital work. He strips away centuries of mystical, eschatological baggage from this verse.
Right, because the default human reaction to that verse is sheer terror. We read it as this spooky, eye-in-the-sky warning. We imagine a magical entity with a giant spyglass peering through our roofs, writing down every time we steal a cookie in a giant physical ledger in the clouds, just waiting to throw lightning bolts at us.
The magical spy theory of morality.
Exactly.
Parwez argues that this framing completely misses the point. You have to read this as a systems engineer. This verse is a profound statement about the absolute completeness and inescapable causality of the universe's accounting system.
Let's look at the precision of the metaphor. A mustard seed. Why a mustard seed?
Because a mustard seed is virtually microscopic. By using this specific weight, the text is declaring a fundamental law of physics for human behavior. There is no minimum threshold below which actions are exempt from consequence.
Zero exemptions.
Right. Think about human legal systems. They are built on thresholds. If somebody steals $10 million, the FBI kicks down their door. If somebody steals a penny from a take-a-penny tray, the police won't even file a report.
The system doesn't care about a penny.
Because the action is too small for human machinery to process. But in the universal system of causality, every single input, no matter how infinitesimal, registers and alters the state of the system.
And then it adds the condition hidden in a rock.
The rock represents absolute, impenetrable concealment. You might commit an action in total isolation, behind a locked door, in a soundproof room, where no human eye can see you, where no human court has jurisdiction.
A perfect crime, theoretically.
But the universe's ledger isn't reliant on human witnesses or subpoenas. The action occurred, therefore, the consequence is generated.
I was thinking about how to visualize this today, and it hit me. This isn't ancient mythology. This is exactly how a cosmic blockchain operates.
That is a fascinating parallel. Unpack the mechanics of that.
Think about the architecture of a blockchain. It's a decentralized, distributed ledger. There is no single guy in a room writing things down. The system itself records everything automatically.
It's structural.
Exactly. Every single transaction, every data input is time-stamped, encrypted, and permanently written into the code. You cannot delete it. You cannot bribe the system administrators to ignore it because there are no administrators.
And the size of the transaction doesn't matter.
Right. The system doesn't care if the transaction was for $1 billion or a fraction of a cent, the mustard seed. It is permanently recorded in the immutable architecture of the network. What this verse is saying is that human behavior operates on a cosmic blockchain. There are absolutely zero off-the-books transactions. Every thought, every intention, every microaction rewrites the code of your own psychology and sends ripples into the society around you.
That is a brilliantly accurate modern translation of Parwez's core thesis. Every action leaves a physiological and psychological residue on the human self. No consequence is ever lost in the ether.
It's all recorded.
And when you fully grasp the implications of this rational, unbroken ledger, you realize that it completely destroys other major civilizational constructs that humans have invented to explain suffering or morality.
Like the concept of original sin. Let's put original sin up against this cosmic blockchain.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
The premise of original sin, which has shaped massive portions of Western civilization, suggests that human beings are born with an unwashable inherited stain. Because an ancestor in the distant past ate a forbidden fruit, every human is born fundamentally corrupted.
In your terms, it means the hardware is corrupted straight out of the box.
Exactly. And because you are corrupted from birth, you can never, ever balance your own ledger through your own actions. You are infinitely in debt on day one.
You're set up to fail.
Right. Therefore, the system requires a supernatural loophole. It requires a biological workaround, a blood atonement, the sacrifice of an innocent divine figure to balance the books on your behalf because the system is too broken for you to do it yourself.
Parwez argues that the Quranic text flatly and unapologetically rejects this entire framework. A system that requires a loophole to function implies a flawed initial design by the creator. It contradicts the very concept of a flawless universal law.
Because the blockchain shouldn't need a backdoor.
Exactly. The ledger of the mustard seed dictates that you are strictly accountable for the seeds you plant. You do not inherit the debt of your ancestors, and no one can pay your debt for you.
Okay, what about karma? Because karma also operates like a ledger. It tracks actions and consequences.
It does, but it introduces a systemic flaw by stretching that ledger across multiple lifetimes through reincarnation. And this is where the socioeconomic critique becomes vital. The concept of karma suggests that a person might be born into crushing poverty, or born with a severe congenital illness, or born into a lower caste as a direct punishment for actions they committed in a past life.
But they have absolutely zero memory of those actions.
Precisely. It effectively punishes a conscious being without giving them the data required to learn from the mistake. If the purpose of a consequence in a rational system is to correct behavior and develop the human self, punishing someone for a forgotten crime is systemically useless. It doesn't teach, it just oppresses.
It's an exemption system for the elites. If I'm a wealthy aristocrat in a society built on karma, I can look at the starving laborer outside my window and say, well, I don't need to change the economic system or share my wealth. He is just working off his bad karma from a past life, and I'm enjoying the wealth I earned in my past life.
It completely lets the ruling class off the hook for systemic inequality.
It's so convenient for them.
It baptizes the status quo. The Quranic text rejects both the inherited guilt of original sin and the memoryless punishment of karma. Accountability is strictly individual, based purely on the verifiable actions taken in this current life, with full awareness, creating rational, observable consequences here and now.
So if we pull all these threads together, the biology, the boundaries, the blockchain, we arrive at the grand unifying theory that Parwez calls mukafat AML.
The law of requital. These three verses, 14, 15, and 16, aren't just a list of random proverbs. They interlock to form the complete architecture of human accountability.
Let's recap those layers so we can really see the structure. Layer 1 is the biological debt from verse 14. You owe real, measurable, dignified care to your parents. You acknowledge the physical reality of how your body was built.
Correct. Layer 2 is epistemic independence from verse 15. Your ultimate loyalty is to the truth and to verifiable evidence. This loyalty to truth overrides all human bonds, even the deepest biological ones.
And layer 3 is the universal ledger from verse 16. Every single action is tracked by the universe's law of causation, and every action has an inescapable consequence. You owe what you owe to your family, you think what the evidence supports independently of your family, and you are accountable for every single input you make into the universe.
It is a complete, airtight theory of individual responsibility.
But wait, this brings up a massive, terrifying question. If the ledger is that strict, if every single mustard seed is counted and there are absolutely no magical loopholes, no savior to pay my debt, no past life excuses, how does the system handle human error?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because you and I both know humans are going to fail. We are going to make terrible inputs. If the ledger just keeps compounding our mistakes, is one bad decision fatal? Are we just doomed to accumulate bad data until the structural integrity of our lives completely crashes?
That is the most crucial question of this entire framework. And Parwes explains that while the system is incredibly rigorous, it is not fragile. The text absolutely rejects the idea of a doomed, fallen humanity waiting to be crushed by its own mistakes.
Okay, so there's a safety mechanism.
To understand how the ledger handles error, we have to look at how actions are categorized. They aren't divided into abstract, spooky concepts of good and evil. They're divided into constructive deeds, which develop and strengthen the human self, and destructive deeds, which weaken it.
It's about structural integrity, not magical morality.
Exactly. And Parwes introduces a brilliant biological metaphor to explain the balancing of this ledger. He compares the human self to the physical immune system. A destructive act, a lie, an act of cruelty, an unjust economic decision is like introducing a virus into your body. It does real, immediate damage. It compromises your structural integrity.
The virus writes bad code into your system. You feel the psychological decay.
But constructive acts, acts of justice, providing equitable risk, maintaining the epistemic boundary, these build what Parwes calls the power of resistance. Think about how a healthy, robust immune system operates. When a virus enters, the body doesn't just give up and die.
It deploys white blood cells. It fights back.
Right. An overwhelming amount of constructive action can neutralize the damage of a destructive act, just as a strong immune system neutralizes a virus and restores health to the body.
So you don't magically erase the fact that you caught the virus. The virus happened. The ledger recorded the mustard seed, but you fled your own system with so many constructive actions that the virus is overpowered, the damage is mitigated, and your psychological system stabilizes.
The scales of justice operate continuously. They aren't waiting for some final judgment day at the end of time to weigh you. They're weighing you right now in every single breath. Every constructive act actively adds weight to the positive side of your ledger, fighting off the decay of your negative actions in real time.
I love this because it takes this grand cosmic theory and violently grounds it in how we live every single day. It completely removes the paralyzing guilt and shame of modern cancel culture or religious dogma. You aren't permanently stained by a mistake.
You're not ruined forever.
You aren't marked with a scarlet letter forever. You just made a bad entry in the ledger. You caught a bug. The solution isn't to sit in a corner crying, posting apologies online, or begging for a magical pardon from the sky. The solution is to get up and execute a high volume of positive, constructive transactions to boost your immune system and balance your own books.
And that profound shift from passive guilt to active recalibration is how Parwes completely redefines the concept of tauba.
Tauba, usually translated as repentance, which, let's be honest, in traditional religion just means feeling incredibly guilty, sitting on a prayer mat and saying, I'm sorry 1,000 times until you feel a psychological release.
It's treated as a verbal apology to an angry deity. But Parwes strips that away and looks at the linguistic root of the word. The root of tauba literally means to return or to turn back. It is a physical, navigational concept.
Like recalibrating a GPS?
Let's visualize it. Imagine a traveler driving down a highway. They miss their exit, take a wrong turn at crossroads, and now they're driving down a road that leads directly off a cliff. What does traditional repentance look like in this scenario?
Traditional repentance is the traveler realizing their mistake, pulling the car over to the side of the road, looking up at the sky and crying, I'm so sorry I took the wrong turn. Please forgive me. I'm a terrible driver. All while remaining parked on the exact same road that leads to the cliff.
And systemically, that achieves absolutely nothing. The geography of the situation hasn't changed. You are still in the wrong location. Tuba, in the Quranic systemic sense, requires physical, active effort. It requires grabbing the steering wheel and turning the car
You
around.
can't just sit there.
You have to actively drive back to the crossroads. You have to acknowledge the miscalculation, accept the fact that you wasted time, fuel, and energy, and then you have to physically step onto the correct path.
You have to change your trajectory. It's a mechanical action, not a fleeting emotion.
And here is the most beautiful, empowering part of this systemic design. The text assures us that when a human being executes true tauba, when they take that active physical step back toward the system of verifiable truth and constructive action, the system is designed to respond.
It meets you halfway.
Parwaz highlights a principle from the text. When you take one step toward the correct path, the system steps forward to meet you. It actively facilitates your recovery and amplifies your constructive actions once you align with the universal law.
So let's synthesize this incredible journey we've just taken through verses 14 to 16. What we are really looking at is a dynamic of permanence and change. The permanent, unchangeable principle here is that accountability is total. It is non-negotiable.
The rules don't bend for anyone.
The cosmic blockchain records everything. You cannot discharge your personal accountability by hiding behind your family loyalty. You cannot buy your way out of the ledger with hoarded wealth. And you certainly cannot get a religious exemption through blind faith, original sin, or karma.
That is the permanent law of civilizational physics. The transient element, the thing that changes depending on the era, is how human societies constantly try to invent new exemption systems to bypass this law. We are obsessed with finding loopholes.
It's what we do best as humans.
Throughout history, we've tried the divine right of kings, claiming the monarch is magically exempt from the rules of the peasants. We've tried the caste system, claiming the highest tier is exempt by birth.
And today, we do the exact same thing, just with different labels. We use immense corporate wealth or political party membership or social media celebrity status as our exemption systems. We constantly build human hierarchies to try and stand above consequence.
But the universal ledger ignores all of them. And what is so profoundly radical about Surah Luqman verses 14 through 16 is that it doesn't start by attacking kings or politicians. It starts by dismantling the most foundational, deeply felt, intimate human exemption system of all, the family unit.
The toughest one to break.
It says, yes, love them, care for them, shelter them under your wing in their old age, but do not let your biological love for them blind you to empirical truth. Do not let the tribe overwrite the law.
We've seen how this text completely dismantles the ultimate ancient hierarchy of unquestioned filial piety. It replaces blind obedience with empirical truth and vague kindness with active, dignified care. But I want you, listening to this right now, to look at your own life today.
Yeah, bring it home.
We may not be bowing to statues, and we may not be following kings into the forest like Ram, but what modern exemption systems are you implicitly accepting right now? Whether it's a corporate hierarchy demanding you look the other way on an ethical issue to keep your job, an algorithm feeding you outrage that you accept without demanding evidence, or a political tribe demanding your absolute loyalty regardless of the verifiable facts. Where are you trading your epistemic independence just to keep the social peace?
It's a question we all have to answer.
Remember, the ledger is on. The blockchain is recording every single mustard seed. Choose your inputs wisely.